The Harley sat at the edge of the gravel lot like a scar, black chrome, road-bitten, still. Its rider hadn't moved in 20 minutes. He was a big man, the kind of big that made people cross the street without knowing why. His cut, a faded leather vest, was covered in patches the locals couldn't read and didn't want to. His beard was thick and gray-threaded. His hands, resting on his thighs, were scarred like old maps. He sat alone at the single outdoor table of Patsy's diner, a roadside nothing in a town barely worth a blink. A plate of untouched eggs sat in front of him. He wasn't eating. He wasn't even looking at the food. He was just sitting, like a man with nowhere left to go. Inside, through the grease-fogged window, the regulars watched. A young couple pulled their child closer. A trucker turned back to his coffee. The waitress, Bev, hadn't gone back out to refill his cup, and Bev had never been afraid of anything in 40 years of doing this. Then the old man in the corner booth set down his fork. He was 94 years old if the stories about him were true, small as a sparrow, dressed in a pressed white shirt, suspenders, and a bolo tie with a turquoise stone. His hands shook slightly as he folded his napkin. His eyes, pale gray, extraordinarily clear, were fixed on the man outside. He watched the biker the way a person watches a fire, patient, knowing, unafraid. Then he slowly pushed himself to his feet. And when the old man walked toward the door, every single person in that diner went completely still. Patsy's Diner had been on Route 9 since 1961. It smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, and the particular sadness of places that time had decided to leave behind. The ceiling fans turned slowly. A country station played too low to make out the words. The booths were red vinyl, cracked and retaped so many times the repairs had their own repairs. It was the kind of place where people knew each other's orders, their marriages, and their sorrows. Strangers weren't unusual. Route 9 sent plenty of them through. But this stranger was different, and everyone felt it the moment he'd pulled in. He hadn't caused trouble, hadn't looked at anyone wrong, hadn't said more than 2 words when he ordered, but something about him sat heavy in the room like a pressure change before a storm. People kept glancing out the window at him, then glancing away. His name, not that anyone here knew it, was Dexter Cole, and he had been riding for 11 days straight, sleeping in the saddle when he could, stopping only for gas and whatever kept him from thinking too hard about what he was riding away from. Or rather, what he was riding toward, because there was a destination. He just wasn't sure he deserved to arrive. The old man in the corner booth had been coming to Patsy's every Thursday for, Bev figured, maybe 6 or 7 years. He came alone. He ordered the same thing, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. He never talked about himself. He tipped well. He had the look of a man who had lived so long and so fully that the world no longer surprised him. His name was Harold, and when he saw Dexter Cole sitting alone with a plate of untouched eggs and the particular posture of a man deciding whether or not he deserved to keep going, Harold recognized something. Something ancient and urgent. He recognized the look of a man at the edge. Dex had been riding since he was 17, 41 years on the road. He'd been part of 3 different clubs in his life, not the kind people romanticize, and not the kind people fear without reason. He'd earned every patch on his cut and carried the weight of each one. On the back of his vest, the largest patch read, Iron Veil MC. Beneath it, a rocker, chaplain. He had been the chaplain of his chapter for 9 years. Not because he was the most righteous man in the room, Lord knew he wasn't, but because he was the one people came to when they couldn't figure out how to carry what life had handed them. He knew the terrain of grief. He'd mapped it himself. The patch just below his left collarbone was newer than the others, a small rectangle, black border, white text. It read simply, Lost but not forgotten, a memorial patch. The name below it was too small to read at a distance, but it was there. It was always there. It pressed against his chest like a thumb. His son's name was Mason. Mason had been 23. He'd been sitting in the passenger seat of a truck that shouldn't have been on the road in that weather on that night with that driver. And Dex had been the one who told the driver it was fine to take his boy. Just 15 minutes down the road. It's fine. He'll be right back. That had been 8 months ago. Dex hadn't gone back to the chapter since the funeral. Hadn't answered calls. Hadn't prayed. Hadn't eaten a full meal without it feeling like an insult to a boy who would never eat again. He stared at the eggs and thought, I should eat, and then thought, why? Harold James Beaumont had been alive for so long that his body had become a kind of archive. The scar on his left forearm, shrapnel, 1952, Korea. The missing tip of his right ring finger, a machine press, 1967, a factory in Ohio. The slight drag in his left foot, a stroke, 2019, that he'd recovered from completely except for that one small whisper. He had buried a wife. He had buried a son. He had held the hands of friends as they left the world, and he had sat alone in rooms afterward and figured out, again and again, how to still want to be in it. He had never ridden a motorcycle, never been in a biker club, didn't know the first thing about that world. But he knew that posture. He knew the way a man's shoulders curved inward when he was protecting something broken inside him. He knew the particular stillness of a person who had stopped trusting themselves to move. He had worn that posture himself, after Korea, after his son Daniel, after Alina. Each time, someone had done something small and inexplicable that pulled him back. A neighbor who left soup on his porch without knocking. A stranger on a bus who handed him a newspaper and said, "Thought you might need something to read." A priest who said nothing at all, just sat with him in a pew for an hour in the dark. Harold believed, in the way that only very old people can believe things, without drama, without evangelism, with the full weight of lived evidence, that the world sent these people on purpose, that paying attention was a form of grace, that sometimes the only thing standing between a man and the end was another man, brave enough to walk across a parking lot. He picked up his cane, told his knees to cooperate, and walked toward the door. The bell above the door gave its small brass shiver as Harold pushed through it. The screen door wheezed shut behind him. The morning air was cool and smelled of pine and diesel. Bev watched from the counter, coffee pot still in her hand, mouth slightly open. Harold made his way across the worn wood porch and down the 2 steps to the gravel, his cane finding each surface carefully. He moved without hurry, a man who had made peace with the fact that his body no longer rushed for anyone. Dex heard the footsteps on the gravel and looked up. His eyes, dark brown, red-rimmed from either wind or grief, probably both, assessed the approaching figure the way they assessed everything: threat, intent, distance. What he saw was a small old man in a bolo tie, moving toward him with a kind of determined serenity that made absolutely no sense. Harold reached the table. He looked at the untouched plate of eggs. He looked at Dex. He pulled out the chair across from him slowly, giving it the ceremonial weight of a man who didn't do things casually anymore, and sat down. Dex stared at him. Harold flagged Bev through the window, 2 fingers raised. She understood. A minute later she came out with a plate of eggs, toast, and 2 coffees. She set everything down without a word and retreated so fast she practically left an afterimage. Harold picked up his fork, set it down, looked at Dex again. "You look like a man who hasn't eaten in a while." "I ordered." Ordering and eating aren't the same thing. Silence, the kind that has texture to it. You always sit down at strangers' tables. Only when it seems necessary. "I'm fine." "I know you are, you look fine, that's not what worries me." They sat in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Harold ate his eggs with methodical contentment. Dex watched him the way you watch someone doing something you've forgotten how to do. Eventually, without quite deciding to, Dex picked up his fork. He ate 3 bites, slow, like a man waking up. "Long trip." 11 days. "Where from?" Virginia. And where to? Dex didn't answer right away. He looked out at the highway where a semi blew past, its draft rocking the air. There's a grave out in New Mexico. I keep meaning to go. I haven't been able to make myself. Someone you loved. Yes. How long? 8 months. Harold nodded slowly, the kind of nod that carries weight. First year is the hardest. It doesn't get easier, but it does get different. People keep saying things like that. Because it's true, and because they don't know what else to say, and because you're right, it's not very useful right now. I'm sorry. That stopped Dex. He looked at the old man more carefully. People didn't usually apologize for platitudes. They usually doubled down. You lost someone. A few, a wife, a son, a country in a different way. You carry them all. They don't get lighter. You just get stronger, and sometimes you don't notice that either. What if it's your fault? The question came out before he'd planned it. He heard it leave his mouth and felt exposed, like a wound suddenly visible in daylight. What kind of fault? The kind where you said it was okay, and it wasn't, and now nothing's okay. Harold was quiet for a long moment. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle with one spotted hand. His eyes had gone somewhere distant. Tell me something. The person you lost, were they stubborn? Dex blinked. What? Stubborn, determined, had a way of making up their own mind. A long pause. Something moved through Dex's expression, complicated, waterlogged. He was, headstrong as anything, since he was 3 years old. Then he was going to make that trip whether you said yes or no. You know that, don't you? I was the one who. You were the one who trusted him. That's a different thing. Dex set down his fork. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet in a way he was holding back by pure will. How do you know it was a he? Harold looked at him steadily. The patch below your collarbone. I read it when I walked up. Dex looked down, the memorial patch, Mason's name. Harold had read it, of course he had, simple as that. But then Harold said something that made Dex's blood go cold. The name Mason, that was your boy, wasn't it? Mason Cole. How do you know my last name? Harold reached into the inside pocket of his pressed white shirt. He set something on the table between them. It was a photograph, worn at the edges, black and white except for a streak of color at the bottom where someone had added a handwritten note in blue ink. Harold slid it across the table with one finger. Dex looked at it. His whole body went still. The photograph was of a young man, mid-20s, maybe younger. Dark hair, strong jaw, an easy grin that looked like it belonged on him naturally. He was standing in front of a motorcycle, not Dex's Harley, an older bike, a Honda Shadow painted dark red. Dex knew that bike. He'd helped Mason buy it. Third hand, needed work. Mason had rebuilt the engine himself over 2 summers in the garage, cursing and laughing in equal measure. In the photograph, the young man had his arm around someone. A much older man, small, white shirt. Dex looked up from the photograph at the man sitting across from him. Where did you get this? He came through here, your boy. About a year ago, maybe a little more. Coming back from a ride through the Smokies. He sat at that table right there, nodding toward the outdoor table, and I was sitting right where I always sit. And I did exactly what I just did with you. Walked over and sat down. What did you talk about? His father. The word landed like a stone in still water. Dex felt it move through him in slow rings. He talked about you for a long time. About how you'd built something, the club, the chapter, the community of it. About how you'd been hard on him sometimes and he'd fought you on it. And how he'd figured out, somewhere in his 20s, that hard and cold are 2 different things. That you were never cold. That you were the person he wanted to be like. He said those exact words. Dex couldn't speak. He gave me the photograph because he said he liked to leave things places. Little markers, he called them, evidence I was here. He signed the back. You can look. Dex turned the photograph over with hands that weren't steady anymore. On the back, in Mason's handwriting, he'd recognize it anywhere, it said. "For whoever needs it, we were here, that's enough. MC." Dex pressed the photograph to his chest, over the memorial patch over the name. And for the first time in 8 months he cried, not quietly, not politely, the way a man cries when he's been holding back a sea. Harold let him. He didn't reach across the table. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, steady as an old tree, and let the storm pass through. It took a while, the gravel lot, the sound of the highway, the distant crow of something in the tree line. Finally, Dex sat back. He wiped his face with his sleeve, rough, almost angry, but not with anything present. Just the habit of a man who didn't know what to do with softness. "I told him it was okay to go, and it wasn't. He told you he was going regardless. Didn't he? That's what those boys do, what you probably did at his age." A silence, the truest kind. Yeah, he said he was going." "Then you gave him permission to be himself. That's not guilt. That's love. And somewhere between Virginia and New Mexico, I think you've mixed those two things up into the same knot." Dex looked at the photograph still in his hands. "You've been punishing yourself long enough. That boy spent an afternoon in this parking lot telling a stranger how proud he was of his father. I don't think he'd recognize what you're doing to yourself right now. And I think, if he could, he'd be annoyed about it." Something cracked open in Dex's chest that wasn't grief. Or maybe it was grief, but the other side of it, the side that's gratitude that it happened at all. That there was something worth losing, someone worth missing this badly. He survived for a reason, now live like it. Harold sat back in his chair. He picked up his coffee. He was quiet in the way of someone who has said everything necessary and has no interest in adding more. Dex ate his eggs. All of them, slowly, fork by fork, in a silence that had changed its character entirely. It was no longer the silence of a man sealed off from the world. It was the silence of a man letting the world back in. He drank the coffee. He ate the toast. He set his fork down and looked at the photograph one more time before folding it carefully, reverent, the way he used to fold papers during services, and sliding it into the inner pocket of his cut, against his chest, next to Mason's name. "Thank you," he said finally. The words came out stripped of everything unnecessary, just the bones of them. "Don't thank me. Go to New Mexico, talk to him, tell him whatever you need to say, and then ride home. I haven't had a home base in 8 months. Then find one." Harold pushed himself to his feet with the particular ceremony of very old bones cooperating with a determined mind. He tucked a bill under the edge of his plate, more than enough for both meals, as Bev would later discover, and picked up his cane. He patted Dex once on the shoulder, firm, brief, the kind of touch that communicates exactly what words can't carry. Then he walked back inside, past Bev at the counter, past the trucker and the couple and the fogged window. He settled back into his corner booth, picked up his fork and finished what was left of his eggs. As if nothing had happened, as if everything had. Outside, Dex sat for another few minutes. Then he stood, pulled on his helmet and walked to the Harley. He swung a leg over, sat for a moment with his hands on the grips, breathed. He started the engine. The sound of it filled the lot, that deep, rolling thunder that sounds like intention. He looked out at the highway. West. New Mexico was west. He pulled out of the lot and was gone. Inside, Bev watched his tail light disappear around the curve and felt something she couldn't name exactly, relief maybe, or hope, the small domestic kind. She went to clear Harold's table and found the bill, a 50, tucked under his plate. She also found the corner booth empty. She hadn't seen him leave. She went to the door. The parking lot was empty, gravel and morning light. No car, no figure walking down the road, just the trees and the highway and the distant sound of a motorcycle growing smaller. She came back inside and stood for a moment. He gone. Harold, yeah, didn't see him go. He ever tell you anything about himself, where he lives, anything? Not once. 6, 7 years coming in here, same order every Thursday, never told me a thing. She looked back at the corner booth, at the perfectly folded napkin, at the empty plate. I don't even know his last name. Thursday came the following week, and the one after that. Harold Beaumont did not come back. No one knew why. No one knew where he'd gone, or whether gone was even the right word for someone like that. But sometimes, when the bell above the door shivered and someone walked in from the road looking like they'd been carrying something too heavy for too long, Bev would glance toward the corner booth, just for a second half expecting to see him there, small and still and paying very close attention. And sometimes, for just a moment, she almost could. Some people are sent into our lives for exactly long enough, not a moment more, and if we're paying attention, they're enough to change everything.